Oh, geez. Got a couple curly guys in here with the regulars. Excuse me, miss!
I know, isn't it cool? It's like we're getting away with something.
What?
Don't you love it when appetizers have a little crossover episode?
Growing up back in the 2000s, when fighting games weren't really all that mainstream, my only exposure to them was Super Smash Bros. And those Dragon Ball Z arena fighters. I was young, and I was drawn to video games that had friendly, familiar faces on the box art. Mario, Pikachu, Goku. You weren't gonna tempt me with some generic karate man. I judged books by their cover, and I was very dismissive of new things. I was quite the prejudiced 7-year-old. So, when I happened upon this random video game called Soul Calibur 2 and saw that it had Link in it, the Link from Super Smash Bros? I was in. Anytime I booted up this game, it was just for Link. Some of these characters eventually grew on me, like the cool guy with the staff and the mummy, but I wasn't playing this game for them. I already knew Link, and I liked Link, so I was easily persuaded to buy the game purely because of his presence. For me, his inclusion didn't just enhance Soul Calibur 2, but entirely made the game worth playing. I didn't really even conceptualize him as a guest character. So far as I was concerned, he was basically the main character, while all of these chuckleheads were just there to compliment him. So that was my experience with Soul Calibur 2. Fast forward a little bit to me being a full-grown 10-year-old, and I began to develop more of a taste for cool, edgy video games. My older brother bought this little video game called Mortal Kombat Deception, and I don't know, man, just something about it just sucked me in.
It was not by chance that this struggle came to be. The blame falls squarely upon my shoulders for giving evil the chance it needed, and therefore fulfilling an ancient prophecy. In the end, only Raiden himself stood between Earthrealm and total destruction. Defying the Elder God's wishes, he alone challenged Quan Chi and Shang Tsung in Mortal Kombat, Earthrealm's last hope for freedom.
Their last hope for freedom. Listen, I don't know. I was 10. Something about this was really cool. And it's still cool, fuck you. So this was my very first Mortal Kombat game, right? And that is a very important detail to remember that I believe contributes to many of the feelings I'll be expressing in this video. You see, the 2000s were a very awkward era for fighting games. Back in the 90s, you had the flashy arcade cabinets designed to draw a crowd and shock you with the over-the-top spectacle. Nowadays, we have highly functional online and these huge competitive communities. Fighting games thrive under these circumstances. So, how do you stand out in the mid-2000s when arcades are dying and online still kinda sucks? In Soul Calibur's case, fuck it, put Link on the box art. But Mortal Kombat didn't go that route. For what they lacked, they made up for in vibes, lore, storytelling, and just boundless single-player content. It's really hard to fully articulate. The music, the art, the character designs, it all sold this really dark and brooding, yet goofy and outlandish world of Mortal Kombat so well. There was a key game mode in Deception that was really uncommon for fighting games at the time, called Conquest. Here, you could explore the different realms and really immerse yourself in the universe.
You tempt fate, weakling!
And it's just so unique, not just for its time, but even today, there aren't a lot of fighting games that would go out of their way to craft an entire open-world story mode full of Easter eggs and character moments. And they really force you to play this damn mode. Half the roster is only unlocked by playing it. I sincerely believe this bold commitment to lore and storytelling very much helped contribute to Mortal Kombat being among the few fighters to actually thrive during this difficult era for fighting games. All 3 MK games released during this time period shared the same level of commitment to its characters and universe. Okay, but why am I even talking about Mortal Kombat Deception? This has nothing to do with the topic of this video. Well, fast forward just a few years. Mortal Kombat 9 comes out, right? Big hit. People love it. I love it. The gameplay is better than ever, the graphics are incredible, it's got a big cinematic story mode that kinda dumbs down the lore quite a bit, but whatever. It's a good fucking game. Before long, Mortal Kombat 9 gets a DLC pass, and I remember this very well. It's the first time I ever bought DLC for a video game. In the initial trailer, they announced 3 of the 4 characters, but kept the last one a mystery. It could literally be anyone. the huge Mortal Kombat fan that I am, my mind is racing, right? Could it be Reiko, Havoc, Frost, Draman, Dairu, Darius, the Elder God Argus, Wu Lei of the Tengu clan, Jarek, the Dragon King himself? I'm on the fucking forums and shit. I'm 13 just chatting it up with 40-year-olds online about which of our favorite Mortal Kombat characters is gonna be in MK9. It's exciting. The buildup is insane, and my body is beyond ready. And then it's finally announced.
Betrayal!
What?
Betrayal! Betrayed me!
I'm not happy. This is not even close to what I was hoping for. What the heck is Edward Scissorhands doing in my Mortal Kombat? Suddenly, I'm Bojack now with the curly fry. I just can't believe they would taint my favorite video game series with a random outsider. I didn't come here for horror movies. I came here for Mortal Kombat. This is ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense. Why would they do this to me? But sadly, it turns out I'm the one with the really regressive mindset who doesn't understand the times that we're living in. Freddy Krueger ends up being far and away the best-selling DLC character for MK9 by a pretty wide margin, and this will go on to directly influence MKX. Now, horror characters are just baked into Mortal Kombat's identity. And whatever, I can learn to accept it. Mortal Kombat's all spooky and dank. I can see why these characters are a natural fit. And people love them, whatever. But why would they stop there? MK11 goes on to have even more guest characters, and seems to go for an even broader 90s theme with comic book villains, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and other action movie heroes. Okay, yeah, I get it. Mortal Kombat leaning into 90s nostalgia is probably a smart move. That's where the majority of their fanbase comes from, and there's some cool dream matches here. But of course, we have to get even crazier. Mortal Kombat 1 goes for an even wilder theme. This time, all those modern anti-superheroes, Homelander, John Cena, J. Jonah Jameson.
You're a cocky prick and I loathe you.
Cool, I can see what they're going for. But then, Combat Pack 2 gets announced, and it's just everywhere! We got the other Terminator, Ghostface of all horror villains, okay? Arnold, again? There's no way I'm the only one who looks at this and just thinks it's so stupid. What are they even going for, aside from just throwing in whatever popular faces kinda fit in and will make them money? And trust me, it's making them money. These characters continue to sell like nobody's business. But just look at this lineup! It's all over the place. It's one thing to imagine Alien and Predator existing in the world of Mortal Kombat. It fits pretty well, and it's obviously a cool matchup that people want to see on its own. And I think at least the latter is true for the 90s action heroes. But what is Ghostface doing here? This isn't MKX with the villains, he's here with these guys. What about his powers and backstory fits into Mortal Kombat, and were people begging to see Ghostface versus Conan the Barbarian? Whatever, so I can go on. But let's reflect for a second. Why does this get me so riled up and angry, while Link in Soul Calibur gets my unconditional love? I could continue to be as pedantic as possible and say Link matches the tone and lore of Soul Calibur so much better, or just way more interesting gameplay or whatever, but the truest, most important distinction is actually obvious. I'm not invested in Soul Calibur. I haven't spent years of my life reading lore and speculating about different characters. Contrary to Mortal Kombat, I really couldn't care less about the integrity of Soul Calibur's universe, or the artistic identity of its roster. Any guest character under just about any circumstance is going to be seen as a bonus in my eyes. In fact, after Soul Calibur 2, the only other game in the series I've played is Soul Calibur 6, and that's only because it had Geralt from The Witcher. My love for Zelda and The Witcher greatly overshadows my love for Soul Calibur, while my appreciation for RoboCop and Ghostface is dwarfed by my love for Mortal Kombat. These characters feel like an incentive, while these characters feel like a burden. That's the main issue. A character invading a series I like is gonna get more pushback than a character I love showing up in a franchise that I'm ambivalent towards. But while I do think that my own personal preference is the main contributing factor, I do think there is more nuance to this issue that we can look at. We are undeniably in a golden age of fighting games. Tekken is going strong, Guilty Gear and other anime fighters have become more mainstream, Street Fighter 6 saw a level of success that I don't even think Capcom thought was possible, and the inevitability of guest characters is more and more impossible to ignore. As a Mortal Kombat fan, I had to deal with this concept quite a while ago, but a lot of these franchises are now getting guest characters for the first time, and I'm noticing their communities getting annoyed in a very similar way that I remember being when Freddy Krueger first showed up in Mortal Kombat 9. And this has gotten me curious. Is this backlash inevitable? Is it even possible to add crossover characters without making some longtime fans feel betrayed? It is complicated, but I do believe that there is a right and wrong way to incorporate these characters. Now, I don't want to spend too much time diving into the entire history of guest fighters or anything, but I do think that we can look at some old games and see what they did differently. Guest fighters go all the way back to Fatal Fury Special, an arcade game released in 1993. If you managed to get through the entire arcade mode without losing a single round, you would get a chance to fight Ryo from Art of Fighting. You could also access him by using a cheat code, but he wasn't part of the main roster. It was a secret fight, a little bonus, and the game even specifies that it's a dream match. And I find that detail particularly funny because Art of Fighting is a literal prequel to Fatal Fury. Both franchises share the same universe. Not just a shared universe, a shared city. They both take place in Southtown. It's an extremely stark contrast to Mortal Kombat, twisting its lore inside out and busting the doors wide open to explain the existence of a multiverse and alternate timelines that suddenly justify why Homelander and Omni-Man are suddenly hanging out with Raiden and Liu Kang in Outworld. Fatal Fury, on the other hand, chooses to emphasize that this regular guy who has every reason to be here is still only a dream match. It's very apparent the varying degrees of diligence that developers can take to justify a character's inclusion. Only 2 years after Ryo's inclusion in Fatal Fury, we get to see Street Fighter include their first ever crossover. Street Fighter Alpha not only was the first Street Fighter to really flesh out the characters and the story, but was also the first game to feature guests. Cody, Guy, Rolento, and Sodom, 2 heroes and 2 villains from Final Fight. Very similar to Ryo, this is an easy crossover as Final Fight is also made by Capcom, the same company that makes Street Fighter, and takes place in the same world as Street Fighter, at around the same time period. So it's easy, it just makes sense. All these characters became mainstays, with Cody having some of the most interesting developments of any Street Fighter character. The entire Final Fight franchise is now completely intertwined with Street Fighter, with more characters being added in every installment. And it wasn't until the year 2020, with the 5th wave of DLC characters in Street Fighter V, that Capcom would cross over with a different franchise. Now, keep in mind, I said 2020. This is 30 years into the Street Fighter series, and they've yet to add a single crossover character outside of Final Fight. Meanwhile, Soul Calibur had already had all of its wild crossovers, Mortal Kombat had already gone insane with MKX and MK11, Tekken 7 already had Akuma, Noctis, fucking Negan from The Walking Dead. The competition was going insane with their guest fighters. And what did Capcom do? Akira from Rival Schools. Rival Schools. How many of you have even heard of this character or this series? Again, literally just a Capcom-owned character from an obscure fighting game that people barely remember. And I mean, she fits great. Like Final Fight, you don't have to stretch your imagination or anything. She looks like she belongs, she plays great. But what's crazy is they could have done anything. This is Capcom. Not only do they have plenty of money to do all the crazy shit that the other companies are doing, but they're also Capcom. They own Mega Man and Dante and the MILF from Resident Evil. Yet they somehow held themselves back and chose this obscure character who isn't nearly as popular, but better fits the tone and the universe while also overlapping with Street Fighter's fanbase. I can't stress enough how impressive this level of restraint is. NetherRealm made one DC fighting game and immediately couldn't resist adding Scorpion. Now, the Final Fight characters and even Akira don't really even qualify as guest characters in a lot of people's eyes. They're crossover characters, no doubt about that, but their universes are so easily intertwined with Street Fighter that the label of guest fighter hardly fits. Well, finally, with Street Fighter VI and their second wave of DLC, they finally went ahead and gave us our first undisputed guest characters. Terry Bogard and Mai Shiranui from Fatal Fury. I've been building up to this because these guys are perfect. First off, what is Fatal Fury? It's a fighting game, one that goes all the way back to 1991, designed by the same guy who made the original Street Fighter. Since then, Fatal Fury as a series, SNK as a company, and Terry and Mai as characters have essentially acted as rivals to Street Fighter ever since, even crossing over multiple times in dedicated Capcom vs SNK games. The historical importance that these characters have to Street Fighter is so significant that it almost feels impossible for any Street Fighter fan to be upset. Like I mentioned that almost any character is going to be met from some backlash, specifically from the die-hard fans who really want Street Fighter to stay authentic, but there are so few people who are like, oh no, these guys wasted a slot, they should have added Remy instead. And even for people who care so much about the lore of Street Fighter, you're telling them that Terry just grabbed a bus ticket from Southtown to Metro City, that he's just gonna walk down the street and bump into Ken Masters? Yeah, why not? That's super believable. Does that mean the entire universe of Fatal Fury exists within the universe of Street Fighter? Maybe, you can look at it that way, or you could just say it's a different version of Terry and Mai that does exist in this universe. Either way, it's so tame and believable. Side note, compare this to Akuma in Tekken 7. Similarly, that's a really cool crossover. Akuma in Tekken is cool, and it honestly makes a lot of sense, and it fits really well. But he's not just in it, he is a focal point. He is in the story mode. Not just in the story mode, he is the most important player in it, aside from like Heihachi. And he really is well done in this game. His gameplay is really, really fun. And Akuma in Tekken, it's exciting for Tekken fans and Street Fighter fans. It's really cool. But they were so heavy-handed with his story significance that this also ended up being controversial. And they turned what was kind of a perfect crossover into an extremely divisive one. But here, Terry Bogard just shows up, he sees Ken and goes, "Hey man, are you okay? Keep your chin up."
Get serious!
It's just the right amount that you need from Terry. He doesn't need to be a big presence in the story. He's just there, he says, "What's up, Ken?" And that's awesome. I just love it so much. Like, this is simultaneously a pretty uncontroversial guest character, but also a crazy, groundbreaking character as well. Because Street Fighter had been so restrained in the past that even adding a character like this, who almost doesn't even feel like a guest, once again, still feels insane and gets the fan base absolutely nuts. Oh yeah, and they play great. They have such fun movesets, and I've seen so many SNK fans say that these are two of the best interpretations of both of these characters. They have every move you could want, their personalities come through perfectly in this game. It's incredible. This crossover is so well done that it is absolutely my definitive reference for what makes a good versus a bad crossover. To condense my points for why it's so good, they synergize with the overall theme of the game and its roster, are so faithful to the source material that fans of the character are beyond happy, and then probably the hardest thing to balance, it manages to push the boundaries for longtime fans of Street Fighter without being, like, at all outside the boundaries either. It's like within the boundaries and pushes the boundaries. It's just the right amount of holy shit. I've emphasized lore and storytelling so much because that does matter to me. I like when characters are in the lore. That's why I generally just don't prefer guest characters at all. But if you are going to add a guest character, it's not that they need to fit into the lore. You definitely don't want to try too hard, like with Akuma in Tekken 7. But they just need to meet the fan base where they're at. What do the fans expect? What type of roster are they used to seeing and do they want to see? Unlike Tekken, which suddenly added a bunch of guest characters with Tekken 7, Soul Calibur has had a few guest fighters in nearly every game, and they vary pretty widely. And I recently discovered that they were always non-canon and only exist for gameplay reasons. It's just part of the tradition. Even die-hard Soul Calibur fans appreciate the guest characters because it's what the game is. It's what it's always been. It's actually not even subversive, it's just part of the expectation. From my eyes, seeing Akuma in Tekken 7 is a lot less weird than seeing, I don't know, Yoda and Darth Vader in Soul Calibur, but the Soul Calibur fanbase was conditioned for this. As far as Bandai Namco goes, they've always had Soul Calibur as this more fantastical series with all these big crossovers, while Tekken has always been a lot more tight and focused. That's not to say Tekken shouldn't ever have guest characters at all. If they want to do it, it's fine, but it's understandable that they should be expected to be a bit more diligent about it. Because Tekken is just a different type of game with a different type of fan base and different roster expectations. And this is something that it seems Capcom has almost always understood. Part of the reason Street Fighter has had such a tight, focused roster for so long is because Capcom has a whole series of versus Capcom games that allow them to go a lot wilder. But even dedicated crossover games are interesting because they also play by some set of rules. Like Marvel vs. Capcom, batshit. It's a wild premise. Crossing over Marvel comics with Capcom characters? Why? but it commits. You got Wolverine, Spider-Man, Hulk, and all these obscure weirdos from comics I've never fucking heard of. And on the Capcom side, you got Mega Man, Dante, Resident Evil, every big name that can pull out, plus a bunch of fucking weirdos that mostly only diehard Capcom fans will recognize. The roster is bizarre by design, because the premise is bizarre. But Capcom vs. SNK, on the other hand, is a much more focused crossover game. Both Capcom and SNK, among other things, are two of the biggest fighting game developers in the industry, and as a result, this is a dream matchup for fighting game nerds. The SNK side gives you characters from KOF, Fatal Fury, Art of Fighting, Samsho, The Last Blade. The Capcom side has got Darkstalkers, Final Fight, Rival Schools, and a whole lot of Street Fighter. Compare this set of Capcom characters to this set. Both of these are versus Capcom games. They could technically do whatever they want. There's no reason Mega Man and Resident Evil can't be in Capcom vs. SNK, but they're not. Now, this is actually debated among Capcom vs. SNK fans. Some wish that the roster was more bold and wacky, but you can also understand why they went in this direction. This is a love letter to a specific demographic of hardcore fighting game fans. And compare this to Street Fighter Cross Tekken, one of the most anticipated fighting games in history. Like Capcom vs. SNK, this is a big boy matchup for big fighting game nerds. A true fight for the ages. Sadly, despite all the hype, the game didn't exactly meet expectations. It actually fell extremely short of them with horrible microtransactions, lackluster gameplay, but hey, it's still a crossover for the ages and can surely at least be enjoyed for the fan service it offers to Tekken and Street Fighter fans. Everyone they want is here. You got Ryu, Chun-Li, Kazuya, Heihachi, Pac-Man inside a mech, Mega Man? I guess that's Mega Man. Cats? Cole from Infamous? Let's step back for a second. Let's talk to each other, man to man, okay? Normally, I don't actually take things this seriously, and I don't mind letting games be silly and ridiculous. However, I think this is probably the best example of guest characters that pleased absolutely no one. Like, these characters are genetically engineered to cause hatred and bring out the worst in people. If Terry and Mai in SF6 are the shining examples of the perfect crossover, this batch of characters are the fucking who's who of how you can piss off everyone. Mega Man fans didn't even like this. They hated this, actually. Didn't help that this crossover happened at the same time that Mega Man had multiple games canceled, so adding this ugly piece of shit just felt like salt in the wound. And like Cole from Infamous, it's so out of nowhere. Like, is there any significant overlap from Infamous fans and people who play Street Fighter Cross Tekken? And yeah, as a reminder, this is Street Fighter Cross Tekken! It's already a crossover with access to two of the richest casts of fighting game characters you could ask for. You're already appealing to vast demographics who are deeply invested in this matchup. They don't want to see these motherfuckers. These guys don't take up space. They jump out and demand that you hate them. It comes across as, hey, we're Namco and Capcom. We have the rights to Pac-Man and Mega Man, so why not? And do you think Cole was this inspired character that they just thought belonged in the ultimate fighting game crossover? It takes one Google search to realize, oh, this game was literally funded by Sony. So it's more of a, hey, we need to sell copies of Infamous, and you owe us for paying for this game. Oh, and I almost forgot. All 5 of these characters are exclusive to PlayStation. So that's 5 characters that a fraction of the player base are allowed to access. Terrible. This is terrible. People overuse the phrase, this character is a waste of a slot, and they should have added the character I wanted instead. In cases like Cross Tekken, phrases like that utterly fail to capture the resentment felt towards these characters. Really, look at this roster. Without the guests, it's impressive. It has all the important characters you need and some curveball picks. Not every crossover gets a roster this big. It really is something. But by adding these guest characters, they don't steal slots from actual Street Fighter and Tekken characters. They are so heinous, so tacky, clash so hard with the game's overall direction, and are so blatantly not what the fans wanted. They effectively act as flashing neon signs reminding us that this game was desperate for money and just completely disconnected from its core audience. Looking through all fighting games, I actually couldn't find many other examples similar to Street Fighter Cross Tekken, a game with that amount of hype. Adding characters that disregard the fanbase that hard and are that hated is luckily pretty rare. And there are only so many examples like Terry in Street Fighter 6. And like I said earlier, there just aren't many examples of guest characters that are fully loved or hated. They're divisive, usually so noticeably divisive. Even Cross Tekken, as bad as it is, at least it's just this separate, weird thing that exists. But usually, guest characters are added to long-time series that have been done a specific way. You add your first guest character, and you open up Pandora's box. Once you add Freddy Krueger to Mortal Kombat, you don't go back to normal. You add Jason, and then the Terminator, and then more and more wild shit, because that's what people expect. You alienate longtime fans a little bit more every time, but that's what the game is now, and it's not gonna change. You know, Super Smash Bros. Used to be an entirely Nintendo-focused crossover until they added Snake, and boom! Actually, it's not Pandora's box. It's like when you give a mouse a cookie, you know, because you give a mouse a cookie and then he'll ask for another and then a glass of milk, because you can't just add Snake to Super Smash Bros. And then that's it. Immediately after Snake's reveal, the requests for Sonic the Hedgehog were so loud that they delayed Brawl just to include him. Once people knew guest characters were on the table, you bet your ass Smash was going to be a different game moving forward. You look back to Melee and third-party characters weren't even a thing, and now you look at Ultimate and the majority of new characters were third-party. Personally, I don't mind, and most people don't mind. Smash is more popular and more awesome than ever, but, you know, it's changed still. It's radical. Smash and Mortal Kombat are two examples of the most radical shifts in roster direction, and the kicker is, after they decided to include guest characters, they've steadily progressed to being the two best-selling fighting game franchises in the world. That's what's so awkward about this conversation. The amount of hype these characters bring, the potential for new fans discovering the game, the benefits are just massive. And while these characters are divisive, it's not a 50-50 divide. It's a fraction of people that get vocally upset, and it's drowned out by those who are enthusiastically losing their minds. And of those fans that are upset, most of them are either just gonna fall in line and accept the changes or just leave. And it doesn't matter that they left because you exchange all these new fans, so it's just not really a bad trade, you know? So with this in mind, I look at a niche series like Fatal Fury, one that has this deep legacy for its lovable, grounded characters, innovative mechanics, and influence on the fighting genre. A series that hasn't ever really reached massive success and relies on its small, passionate, dedicated fanbase. Fatal Fury is finally seeing a new installment after over 20 years. You might have heard of this new game because Cristiano Ronaldo teased it on his Instagram. Yeah, Ronaldo, the football player, the most famous athlete in the world. Actually, that's not totally fair. I meant the most famous guy in the world. The #1 most followed person on Instagram teased that he will be joining Fatal Fury. Now here's the thing, if you're SNK, a company that has been in the video game industry for decades, making niche games that have never seemed to break into the mainstream, always overshadowed by the competition, going bankrupt on multiple occasions, resorting to making pachinko machines to stay afloat. I mean, dude, add the most popular guy ever to the new Fatal Fury? Probably a good financial move, practically guaranteed to bring in fans. People who have never thought about playing fighting games will be interested in playing as Ronaldo. But what's next? You just add Ronaldo? No, you give a mouse a cookie, remember? You gotta add Messi while you're at it so we can play out the rivalry, and why stick to one sport? Let's get LeBron James and Serena Williams. There's gotta be a market for a fighting game centered around famous athletes. Shaq Fu sucked, but it exists for a reason. Now, obviously, I am jumping the gun. Truthfully, we actually don't even know if Ronaldo is going to be playable or featured in some other way. Most of the roster has seemed to be revealed or leaked, and we don't see him yet, so it's looking more likely that he's actually just an NPC or something, but that sounds kind of crazy, because Jesus, why would you tease an announcement like this and not specify that he's not playable, you know what I mean? But either way, the effects of this announcement have already started. You got fans saying that they're excited to buy the game purely to play as Ronaldo, and this backlash of people saying it would piss them off, that they don't want the game to open up itself to guest characters like this. This is the whole deal. This is what happens. You take a struggling series like Fatal Fury, add the most famous guy ever, you guarantee groundbreaking success and a bunch of new fans and likely a whole new direction for the series to go in, at the cost of Fatal Fury's passionate but extremely small fanbase complaining about how they don't like this new direction. But I mean, dude, they wouldn't stand a chance if this is happening. The complaints of a fanbase as small as Fatal Fury is just peanuts compared to the benefits of adding a character with this much star power. Fighting game fans are some of the most passionate motherfuckers in the world. It's one of those genres where the die-hard fans are unfathomably dedicated with the amount of time they'll put into just one game or series. If I had to bet, it probably has something to do with the death of the arcades and the 15 years of this genre rapidly declining and relying on passionate grassroots fandom. And the rosters. Fighting game rosters are just this universal thing that every fighting game fan connects with. These perfect squares with all your favorite characters. When you think about playing a fighting game, you think about this screen. You hear the character select music and can't help from getting excited. Competitive players see this symphony of diverse playstyles that interact with one another and affect the meta in unique ways. Others see a cast of storied characters that have existed for years, each with unique, ever-evolving motivations. I often catch myself just staring at Street Fighter VI's roster and appreciating this attention to detail, the way every character's personality pops off the screen. Oh, I remember a few years back when I first played Guilty Gear. I remember being so excited by this eccentric cast, immediately being able to tell that they're all totally different. And you know, I wasn't even surprised when I found out that this game had entire charts explaining the unique relationships each characters have with one another and their backstories. A new fighting game is announced, and all anyone talks about is what the roster is going to look like. Competitive, casual players, it doesn't matter. Every single person cares about this, with every character reveal trailer being an event. Character and roster is the thing that excites every fighting game fan, and a compelling one is what most regularly draws new players in. It's this beautiful piece of art in itself, a window into all the unique experiences awaiting you in this game. And you know what? It can be an effective indicator of the quality, or at least the direction of a fighting game as well. The cheap promotional characters in Cross Tekken are a good indicator that this game was less of a passion project and more of a money-making opportunity. The strict boundaries of Capcom vs SNK 2's roster is the opposite, rejecting characters that would be profitable dumb fun because it's focused on its mission of being a love letter to fighting game fans. Mortal Kombat used to be grounded with respect for its characters, with clear emphasis on storytelling and world building. Nowadays, they've had to reset the story's timeline twice, have introduced multiverses and time travel, and can't maintain consistent characterization whatsoever. Kung Jin is Lao's cousin in one game and his nephew in the next. Cabal's a bad guy, then a good guy, then a bad guy again. It's the best-selling modern fighting game franchise, yet has this glowing reputation of cheap shock value, clunky gameplay, and over-the-top spectacle. Street Fighter doesn't sell nearly as well, but is credited for its massive influence, innovation, and revitalizing the fighting game genre on numerous occasions. It's the franchise that will be featured multiple times when discussing the best fighting games, usually being considered the best, while Mortal Kombat probably doesn't even get acknowledged. I look at MK's willingness to flood its roster with any big-name character with less rhyme or reason with every game, and I can't help but notice how it reflects the game's overall reputation of inconsistency and cheap entertainment. On the other hand, I see Street Fighter's tight, focused rosters that stay grounded in the world it's created, and the respect it has for its characters reflects the intentionality of every game. It's the difference between McDonald's and a steakhouse that has been honing its recipe for generations. Street Fighter is the game breaking records for EVO attendance, while Mortal Kombat is the game that sells 1 trillion fucking copies, but hardly anyone showing up to tournaments and barely any players online after 6 months.
What kind of characters do you look for when deciding to bring a character from another universe into the Mortal Kombat world?
That's actually, it's a lot more. It's not technical. It's just childish. We all.
That's how I like it. That's how I like it.
We all grew up watching movies from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. From our standpoint, it is. Wouldn't it be cool to see Terminator fighting Scorpion. Wouldn't it be cool to see RoboCop fighting Sub-Zero? And it's as basic and simple as that. There's no science to it.
With the release of Terry and Mai in Street Fighter VI, the director has expressed interest in seeing more guest characters beyond them, explicitly naming Sub-Zero from Mortal Kombat. And I mean, God, I see the vision, honestly. Street Fighter VI is goated. It's such an incredible game, and imagine if it became the ultimate fighting game crossover. Scorpion and Sub-Zero, but then you get Kazuya and Jin, Akira and Jackie, Kasumi and Ayane. But as cool as that would be, predictably, the popular opinion, at least among Street Fighter fandoms, is that Terry and Mai were cool, but can we not do this? Can we focus on Street Fighter? You know, the excitement for a possible Capcom vs SNK 3 is already there. Maybe we can get a Capcom vs Fighting Game All-Stars and just do it that way. I know that's a lot more complicated than just throwing these guys into Street Fighter, but it's just nice when games are what they are. If the concept is that good, then it should be able to be its own thing. Capcom has built up so much goodwill with Street Fighter VI. Maybe it's not worth prioritizing Tekken characters over popular Street Fighter characters like Sagat and Sakura who are still missing. Maybe Sub-Zero would be awesome in Street Fighter, but it would be even cooler if we just explored what an entire Street Fighter vs MK game would look like, without having to change what Street Fighter is. Maybe we can expand Street Fighter's crossovers to include way more franchises. Or maybe they could just finally add Mike Haggar? Where is Mike Haggar? They've added like 10 different Final Fight characters to Street Fighter, and we still don't have the main guy, the coolest, biggest, strongest guy. He's mentioned constantly. He has a fucking monument built for him in Street Fighter's World Tour mode. Can we just get Haggar already before Street Fighter turns into Mugen?